if I told you that in 2026, the Nigerian government plans to discourage the importation of used vehicles into the country? For some people, this sounds like the long-awaited solution to Nigeria's broken automotive industry. For others, it sounds like another policy that will make life more difficult for everyday Nigerians. So today, on the industrial shift, we are asking a simple but very important question. Is discouraging used vehicle imports good industrial policy or another ill-thought decision? And to answer that properly, we cannot rely on emotion, politics, or social media arguments. We need to understand where Nigeria's automotive industry came from, why it collapsed, where it is today, and what it will take to put Nigeria back on wheels. Lastly, what are the investment opportunities in the Nigerian automotive industry? Because this is not just about cars, this is about industrialization, jobs, foreign exchange, and economic sovereignty. Nigeria's automotive industry did not start yesterday. As far back as the 1950s, Nigeria was already involved in vehicle assembly. But the real push came in the 1970s during the oil boom. At that time, the federal government of Nigeria entered joint venture partnership with foreign automobile manufacturers. The goal was simple and clear: assemble vehicles locally, transfer technology, and gradually build vertical integration. This led to the establishment of well-known plants such as Peugeot Nigeria Limited, Volkswagen of Nigeria, Leland, Anambra Motor Manufacturing, Steyr. Passenger cars were dominated by Peugeot and Volkswagen, while commercial vehicles saw competition between Leland, Anambra Motor Manufacturing, Steyr, and Bedford Trucks. On the surface, it looked like Nigeria was on the right path, but there was a major limitation. Most of these plants were not manufacturing vehicles from the ground up. They were assembling vehicles from completely knocked down kits imported from abroad. In other words, we were assembling cars, but we were not building an automotive ecosystem. Demand for these vehicles was also largely driven by government purchases, not a strong private consumer market. And this detail matters, because when government spending slowed, the entire system became fragile. By the late 1980s, Nigeria's automotive industry began to struggle. Several things happened at the same time. There was economic downturn, foreign exchange became unstable, government policies became inconsistent, and most importantly, locally assembled vehicles became more expensive than imported alternatives. Then came the turning point. Used foreign vehicles, popularly known as tokunbo, began flooding the Nigerian market. Suddenly, the average Nigerian could no longer buy a brand new car, but they could buy used Toyotas or Honda for far less than a locally assembled brand new car. And that single shift changed everything. Once used cars became cheaper than locally assembled cars, backward integration stopped making economic sense. Why invest in local components when consumers will not buy the final product? Production volumes dropped, plants scaled down. Some were privatized. Volkswagen of Nigeria was sold to Stallion Group, Leland was sold to Busan, and by the early 2000s, used foreign cars had completely taken over the Nigerian market. We moved from a nation of brand new Peugeot cars rolling off the assembly lines in Kaduna to a country of used, accidented, and flooded cars rolling off the deck of ships in Apapa. Now, let's fast forward to today. Nigeria does still have local vehicle assembly. Companies such as Inosin, Nord, Pan, Mikano, Proforce, Stallion Motors, Dana are all assembling vehicles locally. According to the National Automotive Design and Development Council, as of May 2023, Nigeria has 74 licensed vehicle assemblers. On paper, Nigeria has installed capacity to assemble over 200,000 vehicles per year. But here is the reality. Most of these plants are operating at less than 10% capacity utilization. Meanwhile, Nigeria sells an estimated 720,000 vehicles every year, both new and used. So let's be very clear. Nigeria does not have a demand problem. Nigeria has a systems problem. We have demand without supply, capacity without utilization, policy without execution. This brings us to the real issue. The federal government plans to discourage the importation of used vehicles in 2026. On paper, the intention makes sense. The government wants to save foreign exchange, force demand toward local assembly, encourage manufacturing jobs, support the National Automotive Industry Development Plan. But here is the danger. If you discourage used vehicle imports without affordable locally assembled alternatives, access to vehicle financing, reliable transport infrastructure, then what you create is not industrial growth. You create economic pain. Transport costs rise, small businesses suffer, inflation increases, smuggling expands. Let me say this very clearly. You do not ban imports first, you build capacity first. Every successful automobile and automotive economy in the world followed that sequence. This is where the comparison with China becomes very important. Nigeria and China started their automotive journeys around the same period. In fact, between the 1950s and the 1980s, Nigeria arguably had a stronger early start. But China did something different. China did not just focus on final assembly. China built local supplier networks, forced technology transfer, protected its market strategically, linked automotive to steel, electronics, chemicals, and power. China did not build cars. China built industries around cars. Today, China has surpassed the United States in automobile production and dominates the global automotive market. Nigeria, on the other hand, imports most of what it drives, mostly junk, by the way. To understand where Nigeria and investors should focus, we must understand the automotive value chain. The value chain has 4 major layers. Tier 3 is raw materials: steel, rubber, plastic, silica, leather. Tier 2 is components: rubber tires, filters, gearboxes, glass, pistons, sensors, electronics. Tier 1 is sub-assemblies: powertrain, seats, dashboards, electronic modules. Then finally, the original equipment manufacturer, OEM, where final assembly happens: welding, painting, final assembly, and testing. Here is the key insight. The real money is not only in assembling cars. The real value is in components and sub-assemblies. In Nigeria, eventually discourage the importation of used vehicles. Where should smart investors actually put their money? Most people immediately think of one thing. They say, let's start assembling full cars. But history and global evidence tells us something different. If you want to benefit from a shift away from used vehicle imports, the smartest money is not in final assembly. It is in components and sub-assemblies. Let me explain why. If used cars are discouraged, 3 things will happen. First, demand for new locally assembled vehicles will rise. That part is obvious. Second, vehicle assemblers will come under serious cost pressure because Nigerians are price sensitive, and locally assembled vehicles must remain affordable. And third, and this is the most important part, local content will stop being optional. It will become a survival requirement. Nigeria does not have a shortage of assembly plants. Nigeria has a shortage of local suppliers, and that creates a classic import substitution opportunity combined with a massive supply gap. Here is the rule of thumb every serious automotive investor knows. The most profitable automotive investments are usually one or two tiers below the final assembly. That is where margins are stronger. That is where demand is more stable. And that is where risk is better controlled. Let's talk about Tier 2 components. This is where most investors should start. Tier 2 components typically have high import dependence, large recurring demand, lower regulatory burden, and manageable capital requirements. This is where Nigeria is most exposed and where investors can move fast. If I had to choose just one place to start, this would be it: automotive filters. Air filters, oil filters, fuel filters, cabin filters. Why are filters so attractive? Because every vehicle needs regular replacement, no exception. It doesn't matter if the car is new or used, petrol or diesel, private or commercial. The technology is mature, the raw materials are available locally or regionally, and demand comes from both OEMs and the aftermarket. Your customers here are simple: local vehicle assemblers, auto service centers, and fleet operators. From a capital perspective, this is low to medium capex with a short break-even period, often 2 to 3 years. This is one of the safest entry points into automotive manufacturing. Next is rubber. Nigeria already consumes massive volumes of rubber-based auto components. We are talking about tires, bushings, hoses, engine mounts, and suspension rubbers. This works because rubber components are logistics heavy. They are bulky, they are expensive to transport, and importing them is inefficient. Rubber compounding skills are also transferable, and Nigeria already has experience in related sectors. But here is the important caution. Full tire manufacturing is capital intensive, so the smart strategy is simple. Start with rubber components, build scale and cash flow, then expand into tire manufacturing later. Automotive glass is another strategic opportunity. Windscreen, side windows, rear glass. Why does this matter? Because automotive glass breaks often. It is bulky, it is fragile, it is expensive to import. Local safety standards can also be enforced. The real value play here is in laminated glass and tempered safety glass. This is a strong joint venture opportunity, especially with Asian manufacturers that already have technology. This is one area where Nigeria has a natural advantage. Seat frames, seat foam, upholstery, fabrics and leather, headrests, door panels. Why does this work? Because it is labor intensive and Nigeria has a labor advantage. There is also strong potential for local leather sourcing, and African markets require customization that imports struggle to deliver. Your customers are local assemblers, bus manufacturers, and truck builders. This segment combines manufacturing with craftsmanship, and that suits Nigeria very well. Now, let's move one step up. Tier 1 sub-assemblies. This requires more engineering depth. But once you are in, OEM's lock-in becomes much stronger. This is one of the most underrated opportunities in Nigeria's auto sector. Wiring harnesses, electrical connectors, fuse boxes. Why is this so powerful? Because wiring harnesses are highly labor intensive. They are EV compatible and they are extremely difficult to import efficiently. Nigeria's labor cost advantage applies fully here. There is a global precedent for this. Morocco built the automotive industry starting with wiring harnesses. This should easily be a top 3 priority for serious investors. Next is braking systems, brake pads, brake disc, brake calipers assembled locally, brake lines. Demand here is driven by safety regulations, wear and tear replacement, and heavy usage by fleets and commercial vehicles. Some raw materials are still imported, but aftermarket revenue is strong and recurring. Suspension and steering subassemblies. This opportunity is almost tailor-made for Nigeria. Shock absorbers, control arms, ball joints, steering linkages. Why does this work so well? Because bad roads mean high replacement demand. Commercial vehicles dominate the market, and heavy-duty usage accelerates wear. This is a high-volume, practical investment space. EV-related components. Now, let's talk about the next wave. This investment will not pay off immediately, but they position you ahead of the curve. EV charging hardware, AC chargers, DC fast charging cabinets, power modules assembled locally, enclosures and cabling. Nigeria has an EV policy push underway. Local content requirements are coming, and EV adoption starts with infrastructure, not vehicles. Battery pack assembly is another smart move, not battery cells. Battery modules and battery packs for electric cars, buses, and 2- and 3-wheelers. This allows investors to avoid chemistry risk and focus on packaging, cooling, battery management systems. This is another strong joint venture opportunity, especially with Chinese EV suppliers. There are areas investors should avoid at this stage: full engine manufacturing, transmission manufacturing, semiconductor fabrication, full EV cell manufacturing. This require massive scale, long-term policy certainty, and deep supply chain Nigeria does not yet have. If the used car ban moves forward, Nigeria's automotive gold rush will not be in the assembling of cars. It will be in supplying the components. The smartest investors will enter Tier 2 and Tier 1 manufacturing, partner early with assemblers, and build not just for Nigeria, but for AFCTA exports across Africa. That is how you position ahead of the curve. That is how industrial value is created. And that is the real industrial shift. Note that a ban on used vehicles is a ban on used components that are extracted from these vehicles. And this will impact the follow-come spare markets. So, what actually works? First, joint venture with established Chinese brands. China's domestic market is saturated, and Nigeria can serve as an African production base. We could be the automotive hub for the West African sub-region, just as South Africa produces cars for the Southern African region. Second, targeted government subsidies for automotive industry manufacturers, tied to performance, not blanket incentives. Third, vehicle financing systems. No country builds a car industry without auto loans. The current purchasing power of Nigerians does not support new vehicle consumption. Fourth, technical education. EV technicians, mechatronics, automotive electronics. Developing the capacity of automotive industry artisans and technicians is paramount. Nobody wants a car that cannot be fixed easily or affordably. And finally, mandatory government patronage. If Nigeria truly wants to grow in this industry, government must lead by example by buying Nigerian assembled vehicles consistently. We cannot have our lawmakers importing foreign-made vehicles with billions of naira while demanding the rest of us to drive local. What is good for the goose is good for the gander. Nigeria does not need another policy announcement. Nigeria needs an industrial strategy that survives political cycles. Discouraging used vehicle imports can work, but only if local capacity is competitive, affordable, and supported by infrastructure and financing. Until then, banning Tokunbo cars will not industrialize Nigeria. It will only shift the burden to the people. This is why conversations like this matter. This is why the industrial shift exists. If you want more breakdowns like this on manufacturing, policy, and industrial opportunities, subscribe, like, and share this episode. I am Okpeyemi Olopade, and this is the Industrial Shift.